Welcome back. This is part 2 of Sibylla's story. Let's continue the journey with the new chapter titled Hopes Fulfilled.
Better to have a quiet grief than a hurrying delight. Better the twilight of the dawn than the noonday burning light. Better a death when work is done than earth's most favored birth. Better a child in God's great house than the king of all the earth. George MacDonald. It is more desolate than ever on the beach now, for Wolfe is away at a gymnasium preparing for his final examination. That unfortunate sail had resulted seriously to Ingeborg. The spirit indeed was strong, but the flesh was not able to keep pace with it. A few hours after that occurrence, Ingeborg was prostrated by hemorrhage. It had not returned as her father feared, but the young girl was very much enfeebled and convalescent slowly. When Captain Nielsen anxiously consulted the physician as to the probability of her entire recovery, the latter shook his head dubiously. Ingeborg looked so wan and pale, but a pleasant smile lit up her face, and a spiritual beauty rested upon it which nothing could deprive of its influence. Everybody treated her as though she were a princess. Even the rough fishermen's voices softened when they addressed Ingeborg. She had closely allied herself to Mother Esther, as she loved best to call Frau Eriksson. There could scarcely have been a greater contrast between these two women, the one nearing life's end, the other just entering upon it, the one practical, matter-of-fact, clear, decisive, the other thoughtful, dreamy, feeble, seeing no danger in the future. The one active, industrious, talking through deeds, the other folding her slender hands and musing silently over the play of the billows. But the two had one trait in common. Both talked little, and yet words were not wanting between them. Ingeborg had discovered that Mother Esther was in possession of a priceless treasure. Since her illness, the peace of God had rested upon Ingeborg with an infinite calm, and she knew that whatever happened to her would be for the best. And while her father had instilled the germ of piety into her child's soul, Mother Esther had been the agency to awaken it to life. Another woman's presence had also exerted a strong influence on Ingeborg's character. The Carings had returned again to the beach this season, and their elder daughter had become visible. In former years, no one had been at liberty to approach her in the tent where she reclined. Now, when she was occasionally seen, it was apparent why the family had sought this secluded spot. The white bandage which partially covered Theodora von Caring's face did not wholly conceal the deep red scar on one of her cheeks. Ingeborg had not become very intimate with the Carings. In fact, she was not especially attracted towards any of them. But when she met Theodora with her noble, sincere, ladylike presence, she seemed to the simple maiden like a higher being, one she might model after, not only in mere imitation, but one she could emulate wholly. The first meeting between the two had been in a poor fisherman's hut where a sick child lay. Ingeborg was seated by the little one's bed when Theodora's tall figure entered the low room. One glance assured her that the child was dying, and to Ingeborg the hour passed in that chamber of death was a sacred one never to be forgotten. With womanly instinct, Theodora did all that was necessary. Her eyes seemed to take in everything which her heart at the same time did not fail to appease. Her calmness, her gentleness, her kindness were to Ingeborg traits worthy of adoration, and in the confusion and excitement around her, she looked up to Theodora as though she were a divinity. Perhaps, too, unconsciously, she felt that here was a nature in harmony with her own, a true womanly heart which was its complement. Theodora and Ingeborg became friends. Under such an influence, the child Ingeborg matured to young womanhood. She would also sit on the beach and listen for hours to the singing and sighing of the waves. How simple yet how fascinating were their melodies to her. She didn't care much for Arnold, although he was always attracted to the delicate girl, whose secret influence over him he could not explain and really did not attempt. Ingeborg was not beautiful. Heavy black tresses encircled a small, plain face, but her deep blue eyes had the brightness of stars, no, the mystery of an abyss wherein the whole heavens seemed reflected. There are eyes into which one may gaze and forget all earthly woe, but they are rare. Ingeborg, the counterpart of the young ensign, is the only person whom this clever man of the world does not know how to approach without a feeling of constraint.
Listen to one of his attempts. Ingeborg, how can you bear to sit here by the water so long? I like it. But all alone, not a living soul near. You must be awfully lonely. Ingeborg looks up in astonishment. The water is not lonely. See how it stirs, and listen how joyful now and then how sad it sounds. I could not endure a garden or a tree so long, but here there is constant motion and life. You think so, replied Arnold cynically, because you have never known anything better. You believe there is nothing so beautiful because you have seen nothing else. Ingeborg opens her great eyes wider than ever and merely looks at him. At length she says softly, "The sky is even more beautiful." The conversation ceases for a while. Arnold could have been ready enough with his astronomical knowledge and have talked fluently about the fixed stars and the planets, but he fears to go beyond the capacity of his fair listener. Suddenly he ventures, "Have you never had any desire to see what lies on the other side of the water?" Ingeborg assented. "Oh, I should like so much to see the high mountains and the great cities. I should like so much to enter the grand churches whose windows are painted pictures and whose spires reach heaven high and look like great white lilies." "You should," pursued Arnold, "and shall you not then?" "I cannot travel now. I am too tired." "Then you intend to remain here, never seeing new and beautiful things?" "No, I shall not always remain here," replied Ingeborg confidently. "I shall travel and see the splendid things my father has seen." "Child, when shall you go, and where?" "When, I do not know, but where I do know, in heaven." Arnold gave a half-embarrassed, half-assenting laugh and remonstrated, "But who knows whether there is a heaven? Who assures you that you will go there? Who says it is beautiful and worth thinking about so much? No one has seen it yet. How is it up there? For you talk as though you had already visited it." Ingeborg's eyes waxed still larger. Gazing earnestly at the skeptical speaker, she folded her little hands and repeated in solemn tones, "Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for those that love him." Taken by surprise at the young girl's manner, Arnold was silent. At length he continued, "But, Ingeborg, you talk as though God were a real person whom one could love." His sweet companion making no response, he quickly added, "Do you think that Wolf believes as you do?" Ingeborg nodded her head confidently. "Well, all I have to say is that I am surprised he has never mentioned the subject to me. For my part, I believe very differently." Ingeborg was still silent. Indeed, she had scarcely heard the last remark, and in the entire conversation this one expression only had impressed her. "Do you think that Wolf believes as you do?" Arnold feels terribly uncomfortable, for Ingeborg's words always appeal to his better nature. But now he tries to shake off their disturbing influence so that his own wishes may not be hindered. "Yet this little pious one is interesting here, in this horrible loneliness," he said to himself. But is not the Baron's son lonely, even at Berlin? He is now 22, but he has frittered away the past few years so fast as to be already blast.
He has drunken from the intoxicating cup of pleasure, flirtation, and wine, and he is surfeited without having fully drained it. Every pleasure with which he is familiar appears insipid. He is an old young man whose deepest heart emotions are silenced by ridicule or indolence wherever they venture to assert themselves. Yet he frequently joins the captain's simple daughter, who thinks it very ridiculous that he should complain to her and continually express his disgust of the society in which he mingles. That he should tell her how everybody wears a mask in order to deceive, and no one has the courage to appear true and honest. Her replies puzzle. No, they exasperate him. This foolish child thinks he should be sincere and noble. How is this possible? Then she says he ought to work. She is grieved because she accomplishes so little and regards it a pleasure to be employed. Arnold loses his temper with her sweet, opinionated complacency, and then he remembers how silly he is to talk to her upon these subjects so far beyond her reach, and he calms himself with, "She knows nothing about life's difficulties. How can she be expected to solve them?" Yet an inward monitor softly whispers, "The wisest can give him no better counsel than this. Be true to yourself. Give up pleasures which are really none. Work."
Autumn has come again, and Wolf has returned. He has passed the final examination, made a short visit to his uncles, and will now prepare to go to the university. Like a new student, he was so overflowing with hope and happiness in these days that his uncle felt impelled to call out after him, "Lad, lad, don't throw down the trees in your chase." To his mother he seemed too proud, and yet what mother does not secretly rejoice in her child's happiness, even if she does repeat warningly, "Wolf, Wolf, our heavenly Father takes care that the trees don't grow to heaven." "They will, though," he replies cheerily. Wolf is thoroughly changed. He embraces his mother and sister with a new love, although the former has her own misgivings over the thought that a man's own will is his heaven. He will not remain at home with her. She knows this now. He longs to be away, and is far from being contented here. He is also very little interested in Ingeborg, but he is dear to her, and she imagines he is more regardful of her comfort than anyone else. But he lives in the future, and this delicate girl plays no role in his hopes and dreams. The evening before his departure, Frau Eriksson drew her son aside to consult him with regard to their personal interests. She had divided what she owned between her two children. Karen should have the little cottage, and Wolf the money, which, if used economically, would be sufficient for his years at the university. "You know," she continued, "Martin and Karen love each other. I have no objection to Martin. He's a deserving young man. But his father thinks our little house too small, and yet he is better satisfied than if Karen were entirely portionless. Therefore, Martin is to go away for a couple of years to see the world, and when he returns, the wedding will take place. Meanwhile, if I should be called away, and this should never take place, remember, Karen has only you. She looks small, but she is a brave girl." Wolf pressed his mother's hand to emphasize his entire satisfaction in all her arrangements. Then he bade goodbye to the neighbors and to Captain Nielsen and his daughter. The old sea captain had lamented that Wolf had not become a shipmaster and that he had decided to study a profession before going abroad, but now he was reconciled for him to study medicine. "Come back soon a celebrated doctor and cure my daughter," was his parting injunction. "Yes, Ingeborg, I will come back and make you well," replied Wolf heartily. The young girl smiled assentingly. She believed Wolf capable of doing everything. The separation was a greater trial to Frau Eriksson than she had anticipated. Heretofore, her son had not been far away. Now he was going a great distance. After all, he is her heart's darling, and her home is desolate without him. She has not burdened him with admonitions. She realizes how different everything will be in the new world which he is about to enter. Of what avail would her exhortations be? But on the day before, she had knelt beside her son and earnestly petitioned, "Forsake not thy God and Savior, so act that you shall never be ashamed in his presence." And now he is gone for long years. Shall mother and son ever be reunited? And how? The old routine of daily life is renewed. Karen attends to the household duties, while Ingeborg may be seen slipping into Mother Esther's own little room. She has in this way seen Wolf once more, unobserved by him, and now she turns to her mother. Frau Eriksson has not yet recovered her usual elasticity. She is laying away some of her son's belongings, and she lingers over them longer perhaps than necessary. Just as Ingeborg approaches, she is holding up an old waistcoat, and hot tears are falling on it. Life for her will always lie in the past with regard to her son. When he returns, he will no longer be a sailor boy. She goes out to hide her tears from Ingeborg. But to Wolf, the coach travels all too slowly. Ah, if he were only at the end! On the railroad he will be carried so swiftly. Travel on, I may not see whither this journey's end shall be.
This marks the end of Chapter 4. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled Airy Castles.
I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. When Wolf was a little child, he had once seen on an arch a representation of the king's entry into Berlin. There stood the throngs of people, a multitude crowded together. At that time, this thought had entered the sprightly boy's mind. How many things one might find among so many people, and that if he were only at Berlin, there would be no end of pocket knives, lead pencils, and other desirable objects lying in the streets. To his youthful imagination, that great city was always crowded full of people, just as it appeared in the picture. Naturally, this idea had become somewhat changed with the passing years, but today, when he entered the metropolis, there was still a certain irrepressible feeling that he should find a great deal in it. He was standing by a window of the room which Arnold had secured for him, looking down upon a beautiful, wide thoroughfare. Many people passed to and fro, not quite so many, however, as the arch had represented. The room was high, so different from the one at home, and even very different from the one he had recently occupied at the gymnasium. Wolf carried his head aloft, for now he was a medical student. A goal had been reached. He stood at the gate of his city of happiness. There is surely something wrong with a youth who does not struggle after high aims, which he believes will eventually lead to great results. Wolf did not desire to become an ordinary physician. He wished to study in order that he might fathom the depths of every disease. He was possessed with the thought which presents itself to every strong, healthy nature, namely, that disease was an unnatural, foreign element. He would therefore give it neither place nor authority, and when the intruder, with its distorted visage, invaded his neighborhood, he would bravely wage war for life or death. In imagination, he saw himself a conqueror of death, to whose grim influence only the aged and life-weary should be a prey. He saw happy faces everywhere, which he had been the first to create, and with such visions before him, his heart beat higher. But one cannot fly to the top of a mountain. No, step by step must be taken, and oh, how long and tiresome often is the way. Yet at present he sat at the feet of the professors, and among the students there was none more diligent than he. During the past years, the world with its temptations had stepped into the background, and his naturally youthful, buoyant character was again in the ascendancy. With eager, inquiring mind and burning, zealous soul, he listened now to all suggestions from within. There had been periods when ideas did not harmonize consistently, but now much that was obscure presented itself perfectly clearly. Added to this was the new academic life.
Although Wolf was acquainted with none of the students and formed no intimacies, the multitude of impressions with which the gay, bustling city abounded overwhelmed him at every step. All this occupied his mind so intently during the first days and weeks that he went around like one in a dream, out of which he only awakened in the evenings when the heart asserted its claims and sang to him a song without words of friends and home. 3 weeks were thus passed, and Wolf had not yet visited the Cowrings. Why? He did not know why himself. A knock at his door, and Arnold entered. Wolf was very glad to see a familiar face. He had hoped to find Arnold at the railroad station with directions for the stranger, but no one was there, and he was obliged to give a cabman the number of the house where his friend had rented a room for him. Surely there he should find the young ensign, but neither on the street nor in his apartment had a friendly face been glimpsed, a fact which conflicted with his ideas of true hospitality. And now Arnold entered, as pleasant and unconcerned as possible. No apology, not the slightest intimation of any discourtesy on his part. This chafed Wolf, and he was somewhat reserved. "Well, how are you?" exclaimed Arnold, immediately stepping to the window, and without waiting for a reply, adding, "Wonderful view here. Day and night, always something going on. This is one of the streets where a person can thoroughly exist. Now, how are you?" "Thank you, very well," replied Wolf, rather frigidly. "At first, so many strange sights and scenes made me a trifle homesick. I have not made a single acquaintance, and the thought has occurred to me that if I were to plunge into the water over there and be seen no more forever, not a single human being would miss me or trouble himself about it."
Well, you paid your rent in advance, and I guess your landlord would enter an energetic protest against such a violent disappearance, but the fact of no one troubling himself about his neighbor is city-like, and may be said, by the way, of the best people here. After a pause, Arnold continued, "But you have seen something meanwhile. The Kroll, Museum, Lox's Saloon, the recent parade. Isn't it all superb, magnificent?" Wolf replied that thus far he had been wholly occupied in his class preparations, buying textbooks, etc. "But man, how can you vegetate like that in Berlin?" pursued Arnold, and chatting glibly about things in general, he concluded by inviting the stranger to visit him at home. When he took leave, there was in his handshaking such a cold, heartless participation that Wolf felt it keenly and went to his studies somewhat wounded and dejected. And yet, a few days later, we find him at the door of the Carings' elegant mansion. His breath is short, his heart beats loudly over the excitement and dread of the first call, but a certain pleasure thrills him as he is conducted through splendid apartments and presented to the gracious lady of the house. The spacious, beautiful rooms, the elegant appointments, the stately servants, who apparently know far better than he how to deport themselves, and now Lady Von Caring enters in silk and satin, looking more majestic amid these surroundings than even she did in the cottage by the sea, but just as kindly, just as friendly and affable as she had been there. She referred to her pleasure at learning of Wolf's studies and expressed the hope of seeing him very often during the winter. These were the only personal allusions she made, after which the conversation drifted along to various commonplace remarks, among them a polite inquiry for Herr Erikson, his uncle, and she withdrew without presenting her husband or children to the bewildered young student. Unsophisticated one, how can you expect in a formal call to get a glimpse of the home circle, or even to see all the members of the family? And yet this was really what Wolf had desired. He longed for some place where he might feel at home. He was not lonely during the busy hours of the day, but when evening came, there were moments when he yearned even for the simple whir of his mother's spinning wheel. He had experienced no such feelings at the gymnasium. There his surroundings had been so homelike at his instructor's house as to produce a deep impression on his character. And now he had flattered himself that he should be privileged to seek Lady Von Caring's counsel in the arrangement of all his affairs, but he was annoyed to find himself perfectly at a loss for words in her presence.
This exceedingly polite and benign lady had not evinced the slightest interest in his private matters, appearing to be occupied in a sphere too lofty for such trifles. But her son was often to be found with Wolfe, and seemed to enjoy his society, although he regarded his opinions and observations as childish and laughed at them. He had been so much in the world that he was satiated with all it offered, and while greedily coveted and was always ready to share its so-called pleasures, he heartlessly ridiculed and sneered at them an hour afterward. He had many acquaintances, but no real friends nor aspirations, but the naivete of this ingenue was a certain fresh excitement, hence the association. "Why can't you come to see us this evening? Mamma begs the honor. Or are you engaged?" Wolfe laughed. "No, if you wish it, I will come." He who knew no one in Berlin, he engaged. "Well, don't be too late. Soon after 8 o'clock we'll answer. You will only find a few friends there." At the appointed hour, we see Wolfe in the Carings' brilliantly lit apartments. Happily, he has passed the purgatorial ordeal of the servants, but he gives a final reassuring glance at his toilette. Yes, it is en règle, even to the cravat and gloves. The portières are drawn aside, and Wolfe's first glance seeks and rests on Lady von Caring, who seems in earnest conversation with an elderly gentleman. Perhaps she has not observed the young stranger's entrance as he stands hesitating lest he should interrupt her tête-à-tête in the least. She continues her discussion until her companion directs her attention in a friendly way to the newcomer. Approaching Wolfe with the most amiable warmth, she exclaims, "How kind you are to come on so late an invitation! The servant forgot to deliver it, and we feared we should suffer from his negligence. Now please find the young people in the next room, with Arnold," and with a pleasant gesture she invites him to enter.
The truth of the matter was, several of the invited guests had sent regrets, and as there promised to be more ladies than gentlemen present, the Baron's wife at the last moment thought of Wolfe as a makeshift. "Who is this young man? Have I seen him before?" inquired Lady von Caring's companion. "Oh," she replied apologetically, "if I had imagined you were especially interested in him, I should have taken pleasure in presenting him to you. He is a stranger we learned to know at the seashore. At present he is here studying medicine, and he is a kind of protégé of Arnold's." "One can readily discern that he has not been long in Berlin," was the unamiable response. "He needs training, sir," remarked Arnold derisively, passing at that moment. Wolfe was, as it were, in a new world. Welcomed by the Baron's daughter and son, he was presented to so many persons that finally he had not the remotest idea who one of them was. But what of that? There was all around a magical atmosphere of light, splendor, beauty, kindness, and refinement. Such a throng of agreeable figures in white glittering attire, with which the young officers' uniforms picturesquely contrasted, he had never before witnessed. It was like a dream of the Arabian Nights. And Wolfe was wonderfully complimented. In the conventional monotony of society, stale associations become so palling that every newcomer is hailed with pleasure. "Who is that handsome young man? Where does he come from?" were the inquiries made. "He's a stranger, very gifted and of good family. Young Caring, who always has good taste, even if it be sometimes bizarre, introduced him. There must be something back of it if Lady von Caring chaperones him. She does nothing without a motive. Perhaps he is very rich." These were the passing comments upon Wolfe, of which he had no suspicion. He was polite in conversation, had felt the need of companionship, and all these bright, charming people gratified him. That the beautiful assemblage was often hollow and insincere, he never dreamed. He accepted as genuine coin what was simply empty compliment. For this reason he was intoxicated by everyone's extreme friendliness, and believed honestly that so many delightful people had never been brought together before. Lady von Caring was a model hostess. Her whole consideration was the comfort and enjoyment of her guests. She did not manifest this desire too anxiously, but most graciously.
While sitting here, absorbed in conversation with some neglected old lady, her vigilant eye did not fail to observe a young man standing yonder, and a significant glance quickly brought a servant with refreshment to his side. While filling with readiness a gap at the whist table, she was perfectly able at the same time to hold the young people in proper check. "Arnold, be so good as to open the piano. Eugenie, please accompany Herr Erikson as nicely as possible. Oh, Herr Erikson, we shall all be so much indebted to you if you will kindly favor us with a song, one of the folk songs with which you charmed us at the seaside." And turning to her whist companions, she says softly, "You cannot imagine what a beautiful voice this young gentleman has, a splendid bass, somewhat untrained, but the folk songs are even more fascinating when sung in this popular way." Wolf sang. He gave great pleasure to the company. The young ladies hung on his lips. The Privy Councillor's wife secretly envied Lady von Caring this fortunate acquisition. The very economical Lady von Steiniger hastily calculated in her own mind how she would be able to secure this young man for her salon in order to save something in the way of material attractions by the musical entertainment he would afford her guests. When Wolf had finished, several desired to make his acquaintance. His head whirled with high titles and princely names. A social game, which Arnold arranged, also conferred upon him much attention. The mistakes he committed against society's regulations were overlooked and laughed at as eccentricities, and even admired. "Now your entree into society has been very auspiciously launched," said Arnold. "You make conquests like the great Caesar." Wolf made no reply. His face glowed, his pulse quickened. He was so unaccustomed to so much attention. "Only wait a while," pursued the young ensign. "You will get cool, if only you do not take cold." When Wolf returned late to his lodgings, his room looked even comical. He tried to study, but great splendid forms capered around his books, and he did not long for his mother's spinning wheel that night.
This marks the end of Chapter 5. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled All is Not Gold That Glitters. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. As You Like It. It was now winter in Berlin, but the season was much less severe than on the seacoast. Did the many closely crowded houses restrain its power, or did the smoke which curled up from so many thousand chimneys frighten the wind back to its home country? Whatever it was, Wolf had never experienced such warm, mild weather at this period of the year. From without and within, he was so comfortable. Did he realize that much of this warmth was due to the pleasant intercourse which had banished his feeling of solitude? He was standing before a table in his room. 2 letters had just been received. One read, "Herr and Frau Professor Ferry beg the pleasure of Herr Student Erikson's presence at an afternoon tea with dancing at 8 o'clock Thursday evening." The other note was simply, "Frau and Major von Eklund would be delighted to have you take tea with them tomorrow evening." At both places, Wolf had scarcely made his first call, and already invitations came. He would not have been human had he not felt no agreeable sensations over so much attention. Besides, he was by far too well pleased with society not to be attracted thither again and again. At first, it had appeared to him only a kind of chaos veiled in light and splendor. Gradually emerging out of the confusion of names and faces, Wolf began to be much attracted and interested in the distinguished people around him. He began already to speculate in his own mind whether he should accept this or that invitation, where he should meet this or that person, and to calculate accordingly the most favorable outlook for merely an agreeable or a very delightful evening. Meanwhile, invitations multiplied.
Wolf often wondered and asked himself what key had opened to him, an apparent stranger, the doors of so many distinguished residences. He never dreamed that rumor had falsely imputed great wealth to him, and Lady von Karing did not contradict. If she had introduced Wolf for her son's sake, she preferred to patronize a rich youth rather than a poor one. Besides, Wolf's presence was very attractive. Only 21, but exercise, wind, waves, and self-reliance having externally matured an early manhood, he was really an ornament to any assemblage. It is said that in England, stately-looking military men are sometimes hired for funerals, christenings, weddings, etc., in order to give additional éclat to the occasion by their imposing presence. Is it after all very different in so-called society when a person without merit becomes fashionable for a little while, only to be cast aside without reason, like the hat of a former season? Accordingly, here in Berlin, everybody in the highest social circles became duly excited to see and seek after any newcomer who was ingenuous and entertaining, and Wolf was correspondingly happy over the attentions received, while everything he did was accepted and admired, which fact was very pleasing to his amour-propre. It also engendered great self-possession of manner, for it is easy to be amiable when everybody is agreeable and kind around us. Let us accompany Wolf this evening in order to learn something about the people with whom he associates. He has been invited to a reception at the Privy Councillors from Wurzel. His toilette had demanded more care than usual, but it is fortunate for him that no variety is required in this regard among gentlemen. The servants are no longer embarrassing him by their imposing behavior. In fact, he scarcely observes them. His first greetings being over, with quick, eager glance, Wolf seeks Fraulein Sibylla von Herbig, who above all others has made more than a fleeting impression on him. His keen eye fails to discover her, and he stations himself as close as possible to the entrance to note her coming. Meanwhile, he revolves in his mind the comparative beauty of all the lively, friendly young ladies present, and continues to wonder over their luxuriant tresses and stylish, rich costumes. Just now, Fraulein von Karing bows to him as to an old acquaintance, and he hastens towards her as gracefully and securely on the polished inlaid floor of the drawing-room, as if he had always been accustomed to its smooth surface and would rather stumble over the rough boards of a sailor's dwelling. Near Fraulein von Karing stands a blond young gentleman who is always to be found beside her or some other lady at every church, every theater, every fair, every concert, every party. "Allow me to present Herr von Linksuring," says Eugenie to Wolf, who finally learns the name of the gentleman whom he has so often seen invariably attired in brown pantaloons. Then Sibylla von Herbig enters. She is the daughter of the widow Frau Colonel von Herbig, and she is always surrounded by a bevy of admirers. Why are so many attracted to her? Is it her indescribably beautiful oval face with its southern tint, her raven hair and brilliant dark eyes, or the animated conversation she carries on? Everyone acknowledges her intellectual superiority, and though her words are often sharp and sarcastic, and at times seem merciless, her influence is fascinating, for she is never tiresome. Wolf hastens towards her, but the greyhound, as Herr von Linksuring is called, is there before him and says, "Fraulein Herbig, you were not on the ice yesterday. I looked for you in vain." "No, I was not. But the skating was fine?" "I do not know. I only looked for you." "I am sorry," replied Sibylla curtly. "To me, the ice is the principal thing." Herr Dr. Ulhart, a young man, thin and ugly as Mephistopheles, besides being feared on account of his sharp wit, stands near Eugenie also, and cannot forbear addressing a remark to her. "Fraulein Eugenie, how are you doing? How are you enjoying this season?" "Oh, I am delighted," replies the young debutante. "We are out constantly. During the past 9 days, we have attended 12 parties." "A multitude of parties, therefore, constitutes the degree of your happiness," pursues the young doctor with a bitter laugh. Eugenie looks up ingenuously. "And do you not enjoy parties? You are always to be seen everywhere. Why do you attend them?" "Oh, my dear Fraulein, you forget what Goethe says. The world is a salmagundy. We eat it every day and Sunday. Whether we relish it or not is another question. And then I come here because it amuses me to see how people satisfy themselves with empty baubles."
Eugenie looked up inquiringly and was relieved when a lady approached her and interrupted the conversation. She did not understand this young scoffer, whose penetrating eyes pierced her like a knife, but his quick perception divined her thoughts, and he withdrew to join Sibylla, whom he had known for a long time, and who, by virtue of this long acquaintance, permitted him to use with her a somewhat familiar tone of address. "Finally," he said with a sigh of relief, as he sank into a chair beside her, "finally by a human being. For 1 hour I have aimlessly floated around in my tub like Diogenes. Here it is serious, there it is gay, hatred tomorrow where love is today, and still, like Diogenes, I roll around my tub incessantly. Oh, no answer? I thought the great Goethe would reply for you." "You still carry about with you that terrible blade," says Sibylla, rising. "But listen to what Goethe says in such a case. What satisfies the heart and mind in conversation so much as the noble soul which speaks through the eyes? Comes to me that one yonder with spectacles, I am still, for I cannot talk common sense with anyone through glasses." While Dr. Ulhart's countenance grows more and more sinister, Sibylla suddenly observes Wolf standing near. He has overheard her last expressions and cannot forbear laughing heartily. As every natural laugh is contagious to her, she immediately turns to Wolf, and Ulhart walks away, piqued. He is perfectly aware that Sibylla will tolerate no innuendos in her presence. "You were astonished at our book pedantry in quotations," said Sibylla. "Ah, well, Dr. Ulhart and I are somewhat notorious for our Goetheism, which, by the by, is the only thing we do agree in. During long, tiresome intermissions, we amuse ourselves quoting Goethe to each other. Do you also share in our Goethe worship?" "Yes, indeed," assented Wolf zealously, inwardly vowing to study the great poet henceforth more than ever. "And are you familiar with our current literature? I mean, especially the latest?" "I regret that I am not," confessed Wolf. "My studies, together with Berlin's innumerable attractions, leave me little time for such things." He determined, however, to subscribe at once to the nearest library in order to acquaint himself with this field. "Pity," laughed Sibylla, "great pity. I should like to guess with you what novel Herr von Lengsering has just read." "How should we be able to fathom it?" responded Wolf. "Oh, very easily. You see, he always deports himself like the hero of the last book he has read. Now he is the quiet, thoughtful observer, then again a prude. Now enthusiastic from top to toe, then an especially embittered misanthropic hypochondriac. He was most lovely when he had read Freytag's Debit and Credit. Then he personified Fink thoroughly, only it was a pity the nature was wanting to him. But now he must have been reading a romance of chivalry where the cavalier hero was perfectly comme il faut, for only see him, he consumes himself in amiability. If he would only read something else soon, for I am sure he cannot hold out in this way very long." Wolf laughed so heartily that Sibylla contemplated him with genuine pleasure. "But suppose he had no particular favorite, what role would he assume?" inquired Wolf eagerly. "Oh, I shall rejoice in the day when he will simply play the fool himself," exclaimed Sibylla. "It is all enigmatical to me," she continued in playful seriousness, "whether indeed all his heroes invariably wear brown escarpins, for of Herr von Lengsering it may be justly said, changeable in mind but true in color." They go to supper. Wolf is happy to escort the beautiful Fraulein von Herbig.
To her left is seated a wealthy gentleman from the provinces, Herr Bolton. Vis-a-vis, Dr. Ulhart has stationed himself, with the sword always in his eyes. His neighbor is a rosy, young, bashful, but pretty ingenue Olga von Steinfeltz, who has just made her entrée into society this season. But the richly laden table nevertheless represents a veritable famine. Nothing there will stimulate any worthy conversation. It is approached as the table d'hôte of a public inn. People sit beside one another as strangers. There is no deep tone of interest, no sign of the true inner life, no pulse beat of sincere regard. There may be deep spiritual natures among many of those present, but there is no outward manifestation of the same. One is beautifully nourished here on the superficiality of society's higher grade. One presents a pleased expression of face, is immeasurably friendly towards others, but not one single golden word will be uttered. All will be false coinage continually. Host and hostess are amiability and kindness personified, but while they are able to entertain a company which has no immediate connection with the family, comprising mostly strangers bound together by no ties of sympathy, they cannot impart to it any warm, intimate domestic tone, and they have no desire to do so. The guests are received inwardly and outwardly in the parlor. Family rooms are not shown, perhaps indeed there are none. They are all empty and bare to serve the purposes of society. Lady of Caring is an admirable person to revive a dropping conversation. It has occurred to her at this time to project a splendid bazaar for the benefit of the poor. She herself will direct everything. The young ladies will paint and embroider. Influential, wealthy people have already promised their assistance. The court decorator will have charge of the decorations. Gentlemen will buy. There will be a raffle, a lottery, and other attractions can be added which will fill the treasury. Everybody is in ecstasy over it. Lady of Caring has acquired for herself the reputation of having the interests of the poor at heart. But the need has risen to such an oppressive height during this winter, she argues that the work must be taken up more thoroughly and systematically by all the noble ladies as an example that they shun no duty or sacrifice. A playful expression of incredulity may be seen in Sibylla's face, but she bites her lips in order to conceal the telltale smile. Wolf is a novice concerning bazaars. They appear wholly commendable to him. He cannot therefore understand Sibylla's want of interest, and quietly asks the reason. "It is wicked, but I cannot help it. I see in my mind's eye Herr von Lenxering as its good genius, capering around every booth. Oh, if he had only wings to bear up that praiseworthy enterprise wholly! And then I think how charming we shall all be as importunate salesladies in white or heavenly blue costumes. Please, Herr Erikson, do not fail to buy something from me. When we bring to the good deed so much self-sacrifice, you must not hold back."
Wolf is bewildered. What kind of a girl is this Fräulein Sibylla? But Lady von Caring and other elderly ladies deliberate long and earnestly over the affair. It has so many sides and has already reached a culminating point. Many of the managers rejoice when they see in their mirrors that night persons who belong to the noblest and most magnanimous of their kind. Indeed, a maiden lady who is distinguished for her spirituality already expresses herself with holy unction concerning the work in the Lord's vineyard, which no one dares to evade. "I am also a worker in the vineyard," exclaims Herr Bolton, as he empties a glass of wine as fast as Sibylla refills it. Wolf hears the shameful blasphemy with burning heart and head. He would resent it, but even more shocking is it to him when Sibylla looks upon the man with smiles. "Fräulein Sibylla, how can you suffer such audacity?" he says reproachfully, adding, "He addressed that remark to you. What would you? With wolves one must howl or—" And Sibylla grew serious as she continued, "Do you imagine this Philistine, so near to me yet so remote, knows that he has uttered anything unbecoming? He thinks he had made a bon mot. No, I should hesitate to begin a contest here. The fundamental rule of society is never to disagree with anyone." Wolf pressed his hand to his forehead, thankful that he had escaped committing an unpardonable offense. "When I contend," continued Sibylla, "it must be worth the while.
Besides, with such a one as that, the spirit has flown, the dregs remain. Dr. Woolhart had followed the lively conversation between Sibylla and Wolf with the closest attention. Unfortunately, he has not been able to catch much of it, as he is obliged to give a share of interest to his fair neighbor, who timidly offers an occasional remark. He has become accustomed to regard Sibylla as his especial companion at these evening parties, because she was the only one sympathetic, gifted person on intellectual equality with him. He was far too clever to feel satisfied with society's beaten track. Its hollow intercourse, inward deceptions, etc., disgusted him, although he was a participant in them. His disagreeable manner repulsed most people, and he revenged himself by keeping everybody at arm's length as far as possible. He was indeed unusually talented, but his immeasurable self-conceit caused him to make the most imperious pretensions. A premature knowledge of the world, together with a good share of self-indulgence, had not tended to make him very amiable. The world, therefore, ignored or avoided him. This galled him, and laid an encrusted hate upon his heart, out of which stone the water of human love and kindness seldom sprang. Sibylla was the only one who could perform this miracle. So beautiful an objector, and one with so keen an intellect, was rarely found among women. These qualities, added to a long acquaintance, enabled her to comprehend this hard and yet weak heart. But her pride towered high over the domination that Woolhart had times endeavored to exert, and she had an especial delight in showing him that she was free from his influence. She realized her power over him and his dependence upon her, weaknesses that no true woman will suffer. And she inwardly detested the man she could twine around her finger, and who trembled before her. But she enjoyed Wolf's fresh personality. It amused her to see with what undisguised pleasure he enjoyed things that had grown wearisome and insipid to her. And Wolf not only enjoyed her lively conversation, but everything he experienced was heightened in attractiveness and interest by her assistance. She seemed to have such a true, clear view of people and their surroundings. But to return to our company, Dr. Woolhart had made the unwelcome discovery that Sibylla was not troubling herself with his dark, disapproving glances. Therefore, he decided to begin an interesting conversation with his little neighbor, Olga von Steinfels. He was confident he could talk well, but what was the trouble? She is quite taciturn now, and he cannot fail to observe that she only turns to him occasionally, while her heart and ear are fixed on Wolf, who, having once addressed her, is rewarded with a blush and sustained attention. Dr. Woolhart bites his lips. What does he care for such an upstart? But he will not permit anyone to detect his discomfiture.
Herr Bolton is now conversing animatedly with Sibylla upon sheep's wool. He seems to think that war and peace, winter and summer exist solely for his wool. I and my wool and I, are the two poles around which the earth revolves. Sibylla is politely attentive, although she is scarcely aware of what he is saying, but he is interesting to her as an example of the race of genuine Philistines, who, in everything that happens, find only material for the aggrandizement of their own little selves, and in this instance whose highest interest culminates in the rocking risks of a wool-dealer's cradle. Wolf listens to the conversation devoutly for some time, until it becomes apparent that Sibylla is only carrying on a lively banter with the self-important wool merchant, and he can scarcely refrain from laughter. Arnold von Caring has been sitting at the extreme end of the table. The cloth having been removed, he hastens to Sibylla. Wolf is somewhat surprised to find that the young baron does not appear to observe him. "You seem to be enjoying yourself very much, Fraulein Sibylla." "Why should I not?" she replies. "There is such a charming simpleton here, and therefore, as usual, plenty of laughter," interjects Dr. Woolhart sarcastically. "And would you condescend to observe such a one?" retorts Sibylla pertly. At this juncture the clock is observed and the discovery made that it is high time for the company to disperse, a fact that had been ignored too long on account of the agreeable intercourse.
The host and hostess beg everyone to remain, but difficult as it may be to separate, this is impossible, so they exchange compliments and depart, as they came, strangers to one another. They sought nothing and found it. But has no one lost anything? Host and hostess have made their final curtsies at the door. The latter sinks exhausted into an armchair, while the former draws a profound breath of relief and exclaims, "Thank God, the drudgery is over. I thought they would stay forever." "Wurzel, I entreat you," whispers the wife, shuddering. "Do be still. They will hear you. They are not out of the hall yet." With a gesture of horror, Herr Wurzel checks himself. Let us accompany to their homes some of the well-known guests. Wolf has not been able to recover himself altogether in his small apartment. He is still in the glittering salon, and finds it difficult to rid himself of its gay impressions. But when his solitary life at the beach recurs to him, he cannot refrain from instituting a comparison between his mother's humble cottage and this elegant mansion. What a contrast, the one so poor, the other so rich. How happy he is to have learned to know all these great people. It is true he had not witnessed their deeds, but had he not heard their conversation, their plans and resolutions which inspired him with enthusiasm? Wolf reflects on all this and then rejoices that Sibylla has been invited on the morrow to the Carings. No one else has interested him so much. But Arnold von Caring is wondering how he can give Wolf a sleep potion to render him unfit for society during the coming 24 hours. There was a time when he preferred him to all others, but today Wolf is not only intolerable, but very much in his way. Herr Bolton, the merchant, is soon fast asleep, resting as sweetly on his downy bed as if he lay on his darling wool sacks. He dreams of the latter, and then the sack is transformed into a head that bears the resemblance of Fraulein Sibylla. Olga von Steinfels cannot find rest. She sits by an open window thinking of all the romances of princes, cavaliers, and heroes that she has read. The best and handsomest, to her mind, is Herr Erikson. How pleasantly he had spoken to her, more pleasantly than anyone else, or had anyone else spoken to her at all? Lady von Caring is considering the preparations for her entertainment on the morrow. So many bottles of champagne must be ordered, and so much firewood for the open hearth. When she reckons the number of guests and the amount of gas to be consumed, both of these orders must be increased. With such thoughts, she falls asleep, and in her dreams the wood has been ignited, and her house cannot be saved with the precious bottles of champagne. Dr. Allhart is still sitting in a drinking saloon. He seldom returns home until morning. He cannot sleep until then. He is angry with all the world. Oh no, he is too blasé for that. He despises it. The voice of his soul echoes his favorite blasphemous verse. In the ocean of my life, rocks and whirlpools I defy. My own self is the guiding star. My own self is the God on high. And Sibylla? Well, she is just Sibylla.
This is the end of part 2. Sibylla's story continues, and we will carry on in the next video. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. See you in part 3 of Sibylla's story.